Mr Chairman, Labor supports this bill, though it does raise the question of why we're still debating this bill 6 years after it was first introduced by Leanne Dalzell. If the measures in this bill are truly significant and important, one would have expected that the government would have facilitated the passage of this bill well before a 6-year intervening period has passed. And that intervening period creates additional difficulties when we come to look at the commencement and we look at what this bill is about. The title suggests quite accurately that this is a bill that enables New Zealand to apply safeguard measures and provisional safeguard duties at the border. Now, I'm a free trader, but this measure actually is consistent with the WTO, but it's consistent with the measure that was passed by the WTO in 1994 at the end of the Uruguay round. And, you know, that made safeguards permissible. And what do we mean by safeguards? You put safeguards in place to provide temporary protection to a domestic industry from serious injury that's been caused by imports, and you put them in place to facilitate adjustment in a domestic industry to increased competition from imports from outside. But I have some questions to ask of the Minister about why we need these. When was the last time that we employed a safeguards measure, Minister? Has the Minister got that information? Because, yes, this bill is about safeguard measures, but when did we last apply it? And what industries might it still protect? Because it seems to me that having done away with most of our import protections, apart from residual tariffs, and having entered into a range of free trade agreements where this won't apply, are these measures, 6 years after the bill was introduced, still relevant? If they are relevant, to what industries? If they are relevant, when was the trade safeguard measure, as set out here, actually utilised? Now, there are some aspects about trade safeguard measures that are important. There are legitimate trade remedies that we have against certain imports that cause injury to New Zealand industries. But they are actually applied in other areas. The Dumping and Countervailing Duties Act, 1988, for example, allows us to stop people dumping their goods in New Zealand where they're selling their goods in New Zealand for less than they'd be selling them at home. That is a legitimate trade safeguard measure. And the same Act, and an Act that's interestingly 20 years older than the Trade Safeguard Measures Act that this bill is amending, also means that you can put countervailing duties on where a government is actually subsidising the product and therefore that product is competing unfairly against New Zealand producers. So, you know, there are limits to free trade, and that's what trade safeguards measures that the title is about are necessary. But I would like the Minister to address the particular point about, you know, the normal run-of-the-mill protection against imports that are neither being dumped nor being subsidised. Is there still a need, 6 years after this bill was introduced, for those sort of protections, and if so, in what areas is it needed? Now, Mr Chairman, the commencement states under Clause 2 that this bill comes into force on the day after it receives the royal assent. Now, my real question is, what is the government's intention in terms of putting this bill to the Governor-General for royal assent? Because if they've mucked around for 6 years to get the bill even to the committee stages, are they really intending to put this before the Governor-General for him to sign the bill? Because if this bill was really significant, wouldn't they have moved much more quickly? Or her, because there may be a new Governor-General by the time they take it to Government House. But it is a fair question. Why has there been this delay? And once we know the reasons for the delay, we might have some inkling as to whether the government intends to put this to the Governor-General for royal assent, or are we just going through the motions here in the House? Why was this bill delayed for 6 years? Because when that Clause 2 was put into the bill, Nobody imagined it would take 6 years to get the bill through the House, Mr Chairman. So it is a fair question to say, why has there been a delay? Is it incompetence? Was it lack of confidence in the previous minister? Or is there some, Mr Chairman?
The Honourable Fogoff.
Is there some other reason that led the government to delay the progressing of this piece of legislation? But I would argue, Mr Chairman, that the government should move quickly to put this bill to the Governor-General for royal assent. I said at the start I'm supporting the bill. I can't understand why the government has delayed it so long. Is it still relevant? They're particular questions that the minister should address. But the reason that I support this bill was the reason why Labor introduced it into the House. I support it because it streamlines the process of responding to allegations that goods are being dumped or subsidised. If there is a genuine breach of fair and free trade, then obviously you want to deal with that as quickly as possible. The bill removes the temporary safeguard authorities, and I think that's actually quite a good thing, because I think that the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment can now deal with this directly. It doesn't need to go to a temporary safeguard authority. I don't know whether the temporary safeguard authorities are actually costing us any money, but if they are, that's another reason why the government should move with all haste to seek royal assent to this bill. I think the bill does something else that's important, and that is that it creates a more realistic time frame for the investigation of the need for a trade safeguard. At the moment it's something like 35 working days, and I think anybody that's worked in this area appreciates that what's proposed in the bill, a 75 working day period, in some occasions an 85 working day period can be justified. I think the other reason why this should be put for royal assent is because it does clearly set out the criteria for ministerial decision making. And in an area like this, where you're alleging that there has been dumping, or that there has been subsidisation of the product, or that the competition is unfair because of a sudden surge of imports, you do need to have clear criteria that the minister acts to. And those criteria include that there is a serious injury to the industry, that the importing of the goods against which safeguards are being sought was an unseen development, that the safeguards are in fact appropriate in their extent, in their duration and their nature, and that the safeguards are in the public interest. It's also important that these safeguards are compatible with the other free trade agreements that we're in the process of negotiating. I think that the Select Committee, if anybody can remember, when the bill went before the Select Committee, because it was many years ago, made some important changes, narrowing the ministerial discretion, making it clear but narrowing it to increase certainty on the part of those that are appearing before the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, seeking a safeguard or opposing a safeguard. I think it's important that where a provisional safeguard is put in place, but no final duty is levied, that there be a refund of the duty paid, and the Select Committee made that adjustment. And I think the most obvious and most important thing is that countries may be exempted from provisional safeguards where the WTO and trade treaties require. But now that I've got the Minister's attention again, he was distracted when I raised the questions with him before, in terms of the safeguards applying in instances other than where the product has been subsidised or the product is being dumped, when was the last time, Minister, that a trade safeguard was used? Because if we're going to pass this legislation, we need to know that there is still a need for it. When was the last time that the trade safeguard was used? And what industries today, given our low level of protection, does he think might need trade safeguards simply because imported goods are causing injury to that industry? Yes, if it's dumped, yes, if it's subsidised by the government, no problem with the safeguard being applied. But in those other instances where those factors don't exist, which industries does he think we might need to protect? I think those are important considerations before the House in passing this legislation. We need to know that the 6 years that the government has dawdled over this bill hasn't made some of the provisions, at least in this bill, redundant. Why did the delay? take place over such a long period of time? Will the government, when this bill receives its third reading, actually put it before the Governor-General for the royal assent? Those are significant questions. I think the Minister shouldn't just sit there silently. He should make an endeavour to answer those questions, which are genuine questions.
Calling Andrew. Just before I call Andrew Williams, there is a correction to the vote on the closure motion. The ayes were 63 and the noes were 56. This was a closure motion on the border processing, trade single window and duties bill, not the bill that we're currently on. This was a bill previously. I've called Andrew Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the call on the.